I would like to introduce Janice Jagoszewski. She's from the University of Minnesota, and she will be leading us in a discussion about library as partner in the geosciences, advancing teaching, learning, and research. So over to you, Janice.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation. And I was just looking at who's online, and so I see a number of my former geoscience librarian colleagues are out there. So hello to all of you, and hello to all of the faculty and researchers who are online as well. So I have been a science librarian for 26 years and have worked with a variety of disciplines, and for 10 years I was the geoscience liaison to the School of Earth Sciences here at the University of Minnesota. So I do have a bit of background in working with the geosciences, but more recently I have moved into the health sciences. So that's where I am now, but it was really interesting for me to take some of the concepts that we're working on here at the University of Minnesota and go back and look at some applications and examples in the geosciences. So I'm hoping that this will prompt a lot of discussion and questions. So I am using some examples from some of the things we're doing here at Minnesota. I know there are lots of examples of great work going on in other libraries and other institutions, so I'd be really interested in hearing more about that. So we can move to the next slide. And I think, okay. So I think all librarians really, this key question is kind of at the heart of what it is we do as we are partnering with faculty and students and even administrators at our institutions. And it's really looking at what does the geoscience department need that the library is uniquely positioned to provide. And we think about that very broadly. So we are very much immersed in the life of the department, understanding the curriculum and the changes in the curriculum and the way in which teaching and learning is changing, the pedagogy behind it, effectively integrating technology into the learning environment, as well as what is happening with research methods and how research is changing at each of our institutions. So we really need to know what's going on in the department, and then we think about mapping that to what the library does. And so one framework that I want to lay out, and I'll talk about it in a little more detail, is that the library is really focused on the entire knowledge life cycle, not just the products of knowledge. And I think that, you know, traditionally when you think of a library, a lot of people think, oh, books and journals, and those are kind of the products. But really thinking about the whole life cycle from discovery, how do you find what it is you need, and defining those needs very, very broadly. So it includes finding images, finding streaming video, finding simulation software, research data, this whole range of kind of information or content needs. So how you discover that to how can you use it? And that may be how do you manage the information you find, to what are the copyright issues if you are a consumer wanting to use that, to wanting to integrate, say, licensed content into an online course. What can you or can you not do with that licensed content? To you as a producer, you as someone who creates something new, what are your rights? What are the copyright issues? How can you as an author retain your rights to ensure that what you produce is very broadly available, perhaps to the world? So we go from discovery to use to that content creation. What are your options? There are so many more options now than probably what we originally thought of in terms of producing, say, videos for a flipped classroom model. Or we work with graduate students who are putting together their first posters, and what is it you need to know? So, you know, all the ways in which you can create new content. How do you take different bits of content and put them into some sort of digital platform that allows you to then deliver that content? And it might be licensed content, something that's openly available, some of your own research data, putting it together in some sort of package or wrapper and delivering that to your audience, whether it's your students or others. So content creation to then content sharing. So how open do you want to make what it is you produce, your research output or your teaching and learning output, how openly do you want to share that or not? So that whole knowledge life cycle and thinking about content very broadly is sort of the framework that librarians are working in these days. So we can move to the next slide. And so I'm gonna present my thoughts around an academic library. And again, I'd like to hope this will prompt more conversation. And I really, the way in which I have been discussing libraries is kind of with four main points. We're a connector, we're a common good, we're a catalyst, and we're a service-rich environment. And I'm going to talk about each of these concepts in turn, provide examples of the types of questions that that I and my colleagues receive, and I'm assuming probably the librarians online receive as well, just to prompt some ideas about what you can bring to your librarian and how you can consult with them and how you can really solve information problems. And so I'm going to talk about those questions, and then I'm going to offer a range of possible solutions. And again, things to discuss if they're not currently being offered at your institution, things to start talking about. And again, because this is a partnership, we are each working toward advancing teaching, learning, and research, as well as the library's mission around the knowledge life cycle. So we can move to the next slide. And I'll start with that first point. The library is connector. So we strategically link people, person to person, who needs to collaborate, who needs to know what someone else is doing because, gee, you've got something in common. So we strategically link people. We strategically link them to resources, to information, and also to technology to achieve common goals. So there's a lot of consultation that we do, a lot of advising. That's at the core of what librarians do today. So we can move to the next slide. And these are just some examples of the types of connection questions that librarians receive. How do I find this is one I received when I was a geoscience librarian. How do I find a collaborator with expertise in sensors and actuators? This was from a geochemist who was doing research on the ocean floor and really needed to expand. They wanted to develop a sensor and was looking for people with expertise. And this is a very common question these days, particularly with the emphasis on team science by the funders, really finding key collaborators. And that is something we work on. Another one is, would publishing in an open access journal increase the reach of my research? You know, when you publish in just regular journals where they cost a lot of money, you're limited. That exposure is limited to those institutions and those researchers who have access to those journals. If you publish in open access venues, then you increase and you connect with a much broader range of other researchers and really open up the potential to have a greater impact on your field. Another one that we receive with some frequency is, I'm on information overload. What tools will help me manage all of the articles that are now sitting on my hard drive? And so I'm going to offer a few possible solutions to some of these questions in the next slide. So one way that institutions are helping researchers connect with others and find collaborators is through a research networking system. And there are a variety of systems out there. At the University of Minnesota, we use what's called Experts at Minnesota. It's an Elsevier product, and called Pure is kind of the platform for it. But what it does is it organizes, well, it allows us to create a profile for every researcher on campus where we try to pull in and automate as much as possible all of their research output, whether those are projects and grants, whether they are publications, conference presentations, all of that research output, and creates a profile for each individual. But the system also then organizes that information around the way in which the university is organized. So in this example, I chose to look at the School of Earth Sciences here at the university. It's also part of the College of Science and Engineering here. And this is just a visualization. So you could look at the profiles of each individual. You can see on that um, bar that there are 64 profiles for the School of Earth Sciences. Of those 64 profiles, 262 grants are listed, and there's a research output for this time period. Sorry, for 2000, I've limited it for 10 years, 2007 to 2017. The research output is 1,985 individual items. Probably many of those are articles. And I wanted to look at a visualization. So I wanted to look at the faculty that you see the Earth Sciences Department there in the middle, but you'll see a lot of the faculty there on the perimeter, and who are they working with? So in particular, I highlighted Larry Edwards, one of our faculty here, and clicked on his name, and then I can see who has he collaborated with in his research output. And then if you moused over the names, you can see whether they're internal or external. And if you go to the next page, the next slide, I also wanted to look at that Earth Sciences Department and see where their collaborators reside. And so you can, again, if you mouse over all the different locations, you can see kind of the impact that this department is having around the world. But it's also a way then to say, and these profiling systems are freely available. So anyone could come to the University of Minnesota's profiling system at experts and look at, oh, I work with so-and-so, who are they working with? And get a sense of who those individuals are and where they are around the world. So it's also an interesting way for if industry is looking to collaborate with faculty, for them to get a sense of who is available at the university, but it's also a way for the university researchers to connect with others, particularly on campus, because a lot of our researchers, we're a large campus, and we don't know what one another is doing. That's also something that librarians can assist with, because the librarians are assigned to work with every department on campus. And so we talk with one another, particularly now that research is so interdisciplinary. So I in the geosciences would talk to the mathematics librarian because someone wanted to connect with someone there. And so we're able to make those connections almost on a case-by-case basis. So we can use the online systems that are available to us, but we also have a lot of knowledge to bring to that endeavor. So we go to the next slide. I mentioned open access. Spark is an organization and it's scholarly publishing, and I don't remember exactly what it's an acronym it stands for, but they're very much focused on supporting open access and helping faculty and researchers meet federal funding requirements now for public access. So there are different policies for the different funders, and this is just a screenshot of their website, and they've got all of the policies by funder for sharing your articles, and where you might need to, what kind of repository you might need to use, or whether you can use your own institutional repository. So there's for articles, and then there are also data sharing policies. And with the directive that came out of the White House in 2013, all the funding agencies now are really working on developing their plans and figuring out the details. What's also, though, difficult about that process is that they're all taking a slightly different approach. And so there is a lot to know. And again, your librarian is just a key individual to helping guide you through that process of figuring out what are those funder mandates, and then what are your options. Where should you publish in order to make your journal openly available? What are your options for sharing your data? So they can advise on all of that. The next slide is also an emerging area, which is really new modes of scholarship. We have a lot of, our traditional journals, they've transitioned from being a print-based journal to now a digital type of journal, but some of these publications now are also offering a variety of features. This is an open access journal that is published here at the University of Minnesota, and actually through the university, it's Libraries Publishing, Minnesota Publishing. It's called Open Rivers, Rethinking the Mississippi. It's very interdisciplinary. So it takes an approach. This particular screenshot is of an article by Carrie Jennings, who is affiliated with the Minnesota Geological Survey, but they take perspectives on history, perspectives on the economics of the river, around agriculture, around all sorts of different elements, from the humanities to the hard sciences. What's interesting about this particular journal is if you see across the top, the pulse, explore the journal, and then they have coordinates. And the coordinates page allows you to look at a map, and it has little pins, and you can click on that pin, and it connects then to an article around that area on the map. And so it's a kind of interesting interactive way of accessing the content in the journal through through basically these coordinates. Okay, we'll move to the next page. I had mentioned all those crazy PDFs that are sitting on your hard drive. So librarians, we've just really extended those skills that we applied when we created the Dewey Decimal System and then the Library of Congress system, and the indexing that we have applied to databases, to how you can organize all of that information that you are downloading as you're out there searching. And so at Minnesota, we call it personal information management, but your librarians are aware of all of, whether they've aware of all these processes, whether it's formalized in some sort of group that tackles these topics as we do at Minnesota, or whether they do it on an individual basis. But we get lots of questions about which citation manager should I use and why. So we really advise on that. But this is just a screenshot of something that we offer in terms of how to use Mendeley, where you can download a PDF, put it into the Mendeley desktop, freely available, and then it extracts the citation data and links it to your PDF. And then you can even annotate things in there as well. So offering lots of different solutions and making it easy for you to manage your information. So that's the library as connector with just a few examples. And I'm going to move to the next slide. With library as a common good, and again, we are a central place on campus. You don't have to replicate things department by department. It wasn't so long ago I was a branch librarian, and departments were all very individual and autonomous, and we had our own. I don't know. Some institutions probably still have their own technology folks and their own library, but increasingly it's getting more difficult to maintain that, and a lot of services have been centralized. And so at Minnesota, we have centralized a number of things, including, this is a snapshot of our One Button Studio. It's a video recording studio, and we modeled this off of something that Penn State had developed, and I saw Linda Musser on there. So and this was a video recording studio to help facilitate, part of that knowledge life cycle, which is knowledge creation. And so not every department has to maintain some sort of soundproof room where they can do videotaping to videotape lectures that they then want to integrate into their online learning environment. We do this in the library. We maintain it. It's very simple and easy to use. The name One Button is truly that. You sit down, you plug in your laptop, you've got your slides. You don't have to move the camera. And we offer studio lighting and a microphone, and it's just terrific. You press a button, you record, you press the button and you stop it, and then the files are delivered. You're notified via email that they're available almost immediately, and they're delivered for you to then download. We offer 3 different files: your talking head, your PowerPoint slides, and then there's a combo. And then we also provide assistance in helping you edit that video so that you can then integrate it into your classroom. and uh, and then leave more time in the class for facilitating discussion. So that is one way in which we have staff expertise, and that's deep expertise that I really want to emphasize because librarians teach. We teach with technology. We have expertise in how to create content and all sorts of online options for sharing your research data and other products of scholarship. And really, we're helping you solve information problems. So I've couched it as common good, but it really means there are a lot of people behind that who are there to support you. And it may be that your individual librarian doesn't have every skill set because no one does, but they can connect to other colleagues or others on campus who can provide you with support. So for instance, at Minnesota, we have a separate copyright librarian. She has both a master's in library science as well as a JD, a law degree. And so for those really thorny questions, we bring in that copyright librarian to work with faculty. So we'll go to the next slide. And here I chose some of the research-related questions that we receive on a fairly regular basis. Faculty want to know who would fund a particular type of research that they are interested in. We offer a variety of workshops, and I know lots of libraries do, on how to set up a funding alert. How do you find private funding, maybe not federal, but there are private foundations. What's available out there? How can you get connected to it? Another question is, my H-index is 4. What does that even mean? And so providing context, there's lots of measures there for the impact of people's research. But what does it mean? You need the context. The number itself doesn't have any meaning, and we're very happy to help you with that. Another big question that's come out these days is, how do I know if a journal is legitimate? Faculty are being bombarded with invites to sit on editorial boards or submit articles. And we've had a couple of faculty now who thought a journal was legitimate. The name was very, very familiar. Well, it turned out that it was not a legitimate journal. And they submitted their article. It was accepted. They signed a copyright agreement and then found out that the journal was not what they thought it was. And that is a real problem. There are these predatory journals out there. And so that's something you really do want to check in with your librarian about. There are a variety of ways for us to check on, is that a reputable journal, a reputable publisher or not? What's an ORCID and do I need one? I just want to say yes and ask your librarian what an ORCID is. It's a unique identifier for you, particularly if you have a common name, so that all of your work is tied together under that ID number. And it's a great way then to also be using that with that researcher information system that I showed you earlier to connect your work and to receive full credit for that and not be confused with anyone else. Data management plans, we do lots of work on that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But certainly NSF and NIH require data management plans, and we can help with that. We have templates that make it easier for you. We also have an idea of what NSF is looking for. So it's not just that you have a plan, but that you are going to make that research data available for reuse. And so there are other elements, not just that you're capturing the data, but there are other elements that are necessary in order for somebody to be able to perhaps reuse that data. Another big question is, what's the impact of my research? That's really been a significant question over time. I think we've all heard about impact factors, but there are lots of other ways now to consider the impact of research. You know, how is research being discussed in the media? Has your research had an impact on public policy? There are lots of different ways to look at that. And again, a librarian can walk you through that and think about what you need to do to ensure that you're able to track impact. So let's go to the next slide. And this is a screenshot of our data repository at the University of Minnesota. We call it DRUM, Data Repository for the U of M, and it's part of our Digital Conservancy. And so this is just one way for us to help our faculty um, basically preserve the research data, their research data, particularly if it's federally funded, and make it then available for others to use. Now, there are certainly other types of repositories out there. There are disciplinary repositories. Certainly, the USGS has repositories. I work with the health sciences now, and we have them. But sometimes that medium-sized data set is very appropriate for something based at your university. And so here at the University of Minnesota, not only do we provide a space for this is only for when that research data set is complete. It's no longer being developed. Nothing is added to it. It's complete. But we also curate it. So when a faculty member submits the data set, we have library specialists, our data curators who review that data set. They want to make sure there is no sensitive or private information in it, particularly important in the health sciences, but also in lots of other disciplines, education and such. But we also review it to ensure, again, that someone will be able to make sense of that data set and be able to reuse it. So we really look at what kind of metadata it has been applied to that data set. For instance, if it's an Excel spreadsheet, um, are those headers for each of those columns of data, are those understandable? It's funny, but I've gone back to data that I've collected in the past, and after a year, I can't even remember. Wait, what exactly was that header? What did that header mean? And so we want to make sure that the data and that metadata that's applied to it can be understood by others and can stand on its own. So there are a variety of features. And so we will work with researchers to ensure then that that data set either is de-identified appropriately or has the appropriate metadata to actually then reside in our database and be made publicly available. So if we move to the next slide, here's just an example of data that we have in DRUM. This came from the Minnesota Geological Survey. You'll see that. It was uploaded a little over a year ago in November of 2015, and it was the rock properties database that MGS, maintains, and they took a snapshot of it at that point and they uploaded the actual data. You don't see that here. There are links. I could only fit so much on this screenshot, but there are links further down so you could actually download the actual data on the rock properties from the rock properties database. We provide a persistent link so the links don't break. That's again another reason to upload to an actual repository. It will be preserved into the future. We, again, part of the curation process is we look at what format this is in. There are certain formats that will be easier for us to, for instance, migrate if we need to in the future. So we'll work on that format with individuals. Lots of different components that go into this. But this is one way that we are making it much easier for researchers to meet those funding mandates and also then to give you an advantage. Although now, as I'm talking to everyone here, this is what I tell my faculty. I'm giving you an advantage. Kind of as you're writing that proposal, these are some key elements that you want in that proposal that are going to set your proposal apart from others who are applying as well. And it will help give you an edge. If we move to the next slide, there's just something that I just want to mention. And there's a movement right now called Data Refuge, and lots of librarians are participating. We're going to be participating here at Minnesota later in February. I know the University of Michigan has participated, as have many others. And this is in basically downloading and rescuing government data, particularly around climate change, around the environment, because we're currently all concerned that that data may be at risk, and it's not something that can just be easily crawled, and it's not easily findable because it's embedded. So there are a number of initiatives out there to actually download and capture this so nothing disappears. And I think that's incredibly important right now and something I really wanted to mention. If we go to the next slide, I also wanted to mention, give a little shout out to my earth science librarian, Carolyn Bischoff here at the University of Minnesota. I was chatting with Carolyn about some of the projects that she's involved in, and I know many other geology librarians out there are involved in grant-funded projects. And I think this is something to keep in mind, that your librarians have terrific expertise that they can bring to your projects. Also, many librarians are at institutions where they themselves work toward tenure, or in Minnesota it's called continuous appointment. But we have 6 years as well, and we do research and we publish in order to achieve the equivalent of tenure. So this example is a project that Carolyn has been discussing. The Geoscience department here at Minnesota developed an app called Flyover Country, so that if you're on an airplane and you click into that app, it's going to describe the geological features that you are currently flying over. It's pretty cool. And they're now considering how they might embed field trip guidebooks into the app itself. And so they're discussing with Carolyn perhaps building her into the grant so that she can assist with embedding content. And that is something that a variety of librarians here at Minnesota have done. Many of our librarians are involved in grant-funded projects, advising on data management, advising on integrating content, executing on searches that are then embedded into some other tool. And so that is just, again, something to think about, is what kind of expertise do your librarians bring to a project that you are trying to complete? Keep them in mind. So moving to the next slide. An academic library is also a creative catalyst. At Minnesota, we're really trying to help prompt new insights into learning and research, and we're offering new models for shared spaces. So I said we're a common good. We are a central place on campus where we provide certain types of expertise, certain types of technologies. We support the knowledge life cycle. Not every department has to have their own, for instance, video room. We provide that centrally. In this case right now, this is a photo of a student using virtual reality Vive headset. You'll see a little sensor up there behind her, that big tall pole, so that she stays within a certain area, because she's in an immersive environment right now. And so we're really prompting some of the departments on campus to think about ways in which they could integrate virtual reality into their coursework or even into their research. So we're just really helping and identify again, what is it you're trying to do, and providing some of that central support. And we're doing it as just a pilot, as a beta, to see where there is uptake and where there is need and where there are new ideas. So if we go to the next slide. I offered connection questions, I offered research questions. I'm also going to offer some teaching and learning questions, and then give some examples related to being a creative catalyst. One of the ones that we've been seeing lately is fake news is driving me crazy. How can I help my students learn how to critically evaluate information? Again, I just talked about the flipped classroom model. Is there an easy way to record my lecture? Could a librarian help me develop a student assignment on effective ways to communicate using data visualization? Again, a really important point when people are questioning science and how valid is science, or people who aren't just accepting it. Are there better ways for us in academia to communicate that science? And could visualizing it help with that communication? Is that something that our students need to know how to do? Um, so something else to think about. And then again, how can I use virtual reality to provide my students with an immersive experience? So if we go to the next slide, um, the first thing that we did to address that first question, which was about fake news, was to create an online tutorial. And I've got the URL down there in the bottom corner. This was developed by an instructional designer in the University of Minnesota Libraries named Lindsay Matz Benson. And she created this really terrific tutorial. It's really taken off. But how do we become better citizens of information? Again, something that you could integrate into your coursework or in your work with students to help kind of move that process along. Go to the next slide. This is an example of a virtual reality immersive experience, and actually you can search on this and click on it. This appeared on NPR, and it's an immersive geology lesson. When you click on begin, it'll give you two options. One is I'm working on a PC, and I'm just going to immerse myself in this experience here. Or I've got Google Cardboard, and that is just, if you're not familiar with that, that is something that you can just put your iPhone in, and it allows you to then experience a kind of a 3D environment for the images that you're viewing, almost like the old ViewMaster, but using your iPhone and just really a small cardboard. And so it's a really great, so I encourage you to look at this, but it's also just an example of how you can use virtual reality to transport your students and help them explore some, geological concept or area without traveling. And so this is something, quite frankly, that we're doing a lot of in the health sciences in terms of, for instance, we've been talking with public health about immersing students in how to handle a disaster. So what if we drop them into an environment such as Haiti? And how would you respond? And what can you do? Um, we've talked about learning how to do surgery in an immersive environment. We've talked about how you might work in occupational therapy in an immersive environment. So there are many different ways to use virtual reality. I have to say that we made a fairly small investment in the Vive headset and the sensors. We just needed to allot a room. It had been an office, and it was just the perfect size. And we've really been now working with faculty to think about how could we develop the software, or we've got a 360-degree camera. How might we simulate an operating room or something like that? So something to consider is virtual reality and an immersive experience. So move to the next slide. This is an example of data visualization, and we are now just starting to branch out into supporting this, although it's more significant. Minnesota is a large campus. We're on two sides of the Mississippi River. On the other side, we do have our map librarian and more of our GIS experts, but here on the east bank of the Mississippi, we have science and engineering, and we have the health sciences. And so we're now just starting to explore how we can support data visualization for our students and our faculty. This is an example of just using Tableau, a freely available version of Tableau we make available in our library, along with a large screen, a large display, to assist students with what are best practices for visualizing data. What are kind of the basic tenets that you need to know? How do you use this software? We can get you started. We have productivity machines. And then we're working with faculty because they're starting to use that space to teach classes and to use the specialized software that we have. We have statistics software. We do have ArcGIS in our health science library. But to really think about how you visualize complex information and present it. Okay. And so just going to the next slide is my sort of last point about an academic library, and that is a service-rich environment available to all. So what we know, again, about being a common good is that the library is open to everyone. So you don't just have to be affiliated with a particular department to use the resources in a library, and that can be incredibly important. For instance, we have some maker spaces on campus, but you need to be a student in a particular college or in a particular department to be able to use it. And it has limited hours, whereas the library has very broad hours. Again, you could be a liberal arts student wanting to use science and engineering and try out our maker space. So that's important, but it's also important to consider the service that needs to be layered on top of that environment. So it's not just a matter of providing study spaces, or in this case, with this image, students on laptops who can plug in and all use a shared monitor. But that those study spaces and those environments are adjacent to expertise. So you have librarians nearby and library staff who can assist with whatever the students are trying to do. And so I think that service layer is really important and something to keep in mind, that we encourage experimentation and we really help innovation, make innovation happen. Um, I didn't talk about quiet study spaces, but that is certainly still an element, a traditional element that is needed. That when we ask students what they think about when they think of the library, they think of this culture of scholarship, that it's a place for quiet contemplation, for concentration. And yeah, a coffee shop's great or the student union's great when you want to have that buzz behind you, but sometimes you just want to be really immersed in a scholarly environment, and the library really can provide that. So next slide, please. So this is really my last slide, and I do have one final one. But to really think about the library, these are just some examples of the library as a partner, and really your librarian or your liaison as a partner in the knowledge life cycle, that we bring expertise. And this is a picture, the Ask Us picture from the Hunt Library of Science and Engineering at North Carolina State. We have expertise to share. We do lots of consultations and we provide a lot of advice. And if we don't have the answer immediately, we will take that question and we will go and find people who perhaps can assist you. So we do a lot of referrals as well. To the tools and technology that we can provide, again, because we are a common good, centrally located, available to everyone, um, with a wide variety of hours available. And we provide engaging and collaborative spaces. And so all of these things are things that we really want to discuss with our faculty, getting a better sense of what it is you need and how we can continue to change and evolve to meet those needs. So the last slide is just my email address, and I would be happy if anyone after this presentation, I'm looking forward to your questions, but happy to talk with you if anyone wants to call or email after this to talk in more detail. Happy to do that. So thank you very much for your attention. Looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Janice. We do have a few questions to get started here. I guess the first question is, if I'm an undergraduate in a geoscience department, and they're doing all their senior theses, is there a way to actually get these curated through the institutional library?
Yeah, so you're talking about their capstone projects or their theses?
Exactly.
Yes, yes. So we certainly do work. We certainly work with the PhD and master's theses, but so I would definitely talk to your librarian about capturing those. And but we are also, for instance, at Minnesota, we have a research day with poster presentations under, I think it's the Undergraduate Research Opportunities Office, and in fact we support through our map library and our large printer, we actually support printing out those posters for the students. We advise them on how to create an impactful poster, and we actually provide some online tutorials and workshops on that. And then we will also, as we do, assist in getting those poster presentations up into our what we call our digital conservancy, but your institutional repository. Yeah, so I would definitely talk with your librarian about that.
So can you, obviously, as you presented, there's these great opportunities of sort of the technology integration within, the teaching, learning, and research environment. Can you talk a bit about whether your direct experiences or in discussions with colleagues, how the academic libraries have interfaced with the academic computing capacities on
Yeah.
campus?
hmm Yeah, and there, when I said partner, I have a whole another, actually an article that I'm working on about collaboration. And although we partner with the faculty, there are many other campus units that we partner with. So if you think about that photo that I had of the one button studio, the person who's actually sitting in there with the studio lights on, his back is to you, is our contact with the Office of Information Technology. So they had really worked with Penn State at looking at their model for the one button studio. They had changed it up a bit for Minnesota. So instead of, I think at Penn State, you use a flash drive to save your video. Here they instead had it have the output emailed directly to a server, or it's captured on a server, and then you're emailed a notification to download it from the server. So there's no flash drive involved. So they kind of worked on kind of changing it up a bit, and then they made it available in one location on campus that's really hard for everyone to get to. And they didn't have the network to really market their service, and they had a limited number of staff to make it available to people at the hours that they wanted to use it. So once I discovered that they were trying to take this model, change it up for the Minnesota, it was located somewhere on campus. I contacted them and said, "Hey, would you want to implement this in the library and help us do something here?" So they gave us the entire specs. We didn't have to recreate it. They got the specs from Penn State, changed it up. We then worked with them on procuring it. They set it all up for us. So they came and did the setup, and then they have helped us with because of course anything once you start, you've got changes that need to be made. We discovered that the wall, basically the women's restroom, is on the other side of this room that we were using, and the paper towel dispenser was on the wall, and in the middle of somebody's recording, yeah, you could hear ka-thunk, ka-thunk, ka-thunk. Okay, so they said, you got to move that paper towel dispenser. An easy solution. Um, but we want to do a little bit more soundproofing in the room, so we're going to split the costs. And it was so successful in our library that now we're replicating it, because we have 5 major libraries on this campus, and then we have small branch libraries. We are replicating it in the other locations, and we're learning something with each iteration. I'm working with academic computing quite a bit, with the also the virtual reality. I'm working with the Simulation Center on campus. Now that's in the health sciences, but we are working quite closely together to look at, again, how can we work together, do one investment, and meet a wide variety of needs, and how do we build this out together? Working with instructional designers, so again with the video recording room. Data visualization, we worked with classroom management on that element and setting it up. And we did something very simple. I didn't offer a picture, but it's really just like I think it's a 72-inch monitor on the wall with particular furnishings that allow for about 12 students and an instructor to work in front of it. And that's just our very simple approach to data visualization, to see where should we invest in the future? Where's there really uptake, and how do we have conversations with faculty to really build this out? But it all requires collaboration with others on campus. No one can do this alone any longer.
Cool. See, question. Could you speak a bit on creating websites specific to the geosciences on the library homepage? At this particular college, they call them libguides.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, we do. Okay, so in Minnesota, we are just now moving to LibGuides. That doesn't mean that we don't do it. It's that we had a homegrown system that we have used for many, many years, and we can no longer maintain that homegrown system. So we are likely moving to LibGuides. But we have also been able to use, so these are these sort of customized, these web pages for every course. We have developed them for every course on campus, actually, and mapped them to the curriculum so that when a student connects to, say, their Moodle site, their online environment, the web page for the library is kind of pushed out to them. So we've tried to integrate it more into the learning environment so the student doesn't have to necessarily, you can, go to the library's website and then go find their course and you know and find the page for their course. We are trying to do more in pushing that out within their own work environment, and we also push it out to the faculty members so if they want to accept it, they can more easily integrate it into their Moodle sites. We've also done quite a bit beyond those libguides where you're basically listing out all the different types of tools and databases and online content that might support the course. We've also worked on what's called a digital course pack, and we have integrated all of the various types of content that a faculty member might want to identify to support a course that might have consisted of in the past, student goes to the bookstore and buys their textbook. They come to the library to use course reserves. They have to go out and there are things that require royalty payments. So they go to the copy center and they buy a print course pack. Well, now the library here is integrating all of that and we're pushing it out basically out into that learning environment through what we call our digital course pack to try and integrate it and make it easy for students. So some of it might be freely available, and if there are charges available, they can click online, pay the charge, and have direct content, direct access to that content.
Okay. Um, Another question. The undergrads mostly use the geology library for study and to pick up
Mhm.
reserves. What are some ways that I can get faculty to engage the library for undergraduates?
Yeah, I think there's well, somebody had mentioned those capstone projects. I think those are really key places. But I also think what's difficult is that there's, when once we're researchers and we understand the process, we forget that undergraduates are just now being exposed to it, particularly as they identify their major. They may know how to use their high school library. You come to a university and oh my goodness, so many more resources are available to you. They're not yet familiar with what those specialty resources are for their new major. So keeping in mind that you need to scaffold that process for the students, the undergraduates. So in freshman year, you might start out with something a bit simple. You want them to find a number of resources on a particular topic and annotate them. And then sophomore year, you might have them then expand and build on the skills that they've developed up to the point where by senior year, they're working on some sort of senior thesis or capstone project, and you've built those skills so that they are really able then to do a terrific job on that final project. So again, I would recommend working with your librarian um, from freshman year through senior year and taking a more holistic curricular approach to building these kind of what we call information literacy skills into the curriculum throughout their 4 years. And also, I would recommend don't forget the graduate students, because for graduate students who have not had a lot of exposure to writing papers, and in the sciences they don't always, there's a lot of assumption about what they are, what they know how to do and what they're capable of doing, and they are then embarrassed, often embarrassed, to admit that they don't know something. learning, and there's a lot at stake. They have an advisor, and they want to look good, and so keep in mind that the grad students also need this type of support. And the librarian is a great place to send them. They'll sit down with them and kind of step them through processes.
Okay, very good. So, can you, what about as far as educating the students on issues of copyright and legal usage of materials
Mhm.
and fair use and things like that? Where do you see that relationship in educating them between the library and the actual academic programs?
Sure. Again, I think that could be a really great component to integrate into the curriculum. That's certainly a really important issue. Most students really don't understand the concept of plagiarism, and so you do really want them to develop a better understanding. Also, again, grad students, super important. We have had graduate students who have gotten into real hot water, not realizing that that they've plagiarized something. They didn't attribute it properly. So again, building that in and stepping students through that process is important. Online tutorials are a terrific way to convey the basic concepts and then give them some practice in the classroom around it.